Poll also found that, based in part on what's transpired in the last week, a majority of Americans, and forgive me, I'm just the messenger, no longer consider you to be competent, focused, or effective in the job.
I haven't seen that poll.
It's out there from CBS this morning. What would you say?
Well, that was Joe Biden yesterday laughing off the news of his plummeting poll numbers. But this is no laughing matter. Joe Biden's Afghanistan disaster has been the worst humiliation the United States has suffered in decades. And some Republicans are getting tired of just watching Biden let it happen. Florida Senator Rick Scott is calling on his Democrat colleagues to invoke a section of the 25th Amendment, saying he wonders if Biden is healthy and strong enough to lead. Section 4 of the 25th Amendment allows the vice president, a majority of the president's cabinet, and 2/3 of Congress to vote to remove a president whom they determine to be unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office. Joining us to discuss is constitutional law attorney and legal expert Amir Benno. So, Amir, is there any situation here in which America wins? Because if Joe's out, we're looking at a President Kamala Harris or President Pelosi, and I don't think anybody wants that.
Hi, Jen. Hi, Steve. Thank you for having me. To answer your question, this is a very scary situation. And frankly, one that I think that the Democrats were preparing us for back towards the tail end of Donald Trump's presidency, when Nancy Pelosi was trying to urge the 25th Amendment and get Vice President Pence to go along with invoking it. I think the Democrats were trying to prime the pump in some way to condition Americans to understand that there is this procedural device, so to remove a president, so it doesn't blindside them when they choose to do it for right. President Biden. I do think many people dislike the vice president, but frankly speaking, I think that we're seeing Biden's poll numbers just really go down the tubes right now, and so I think he's probably got less of a favorability than her.
Sure. And I think, Amir, it's just a matter of time. And I'm not saying this in any way to be cruel, because it's not his fault. But I think it's just a matter of time before he has a truly embarrassing moment. He's had a lot of minor embarrassing moments so far in front of the cameras. But I think something, dreadful, something just absolutely, hard to watch. Go,
Steve, right?
Is going to happen. But listen, I want to ask you this on the political side, because, I know you understand the constitutional side well, but you also understand politics. On the political side, do you think that those two women are Nancy Pelosi and Kamala Harris, the two ladies from the Bay, are they gangster enough to pull this off? I mean, would they do that? Are they Machiavellian enough to say, we're going to move him out and we're going to make you the first woman president?
Listen, there is some sort of fan dance going on here where they are hiding the people who are pulling the true levers of power. I do not think that it is just Nancy Pelosi or Kamala Harris. Who could this cabal be? We can speculate all day, but I think that there are people who do have enough power to make this happen. And listen, it's not that difficult to happen. I mean, what you need is the vice president to go along with a majority of the secretaries of the cabinet. There's 15 cabinet secretaries. That includes the attorney general. So you need 8 of them to go along with her to transmit to the Speaker of the House and the President pro tem of the Senate a declaration that the president is unfit to carry forth the duties and powers of his office. And at that point, the president is immediately sidelined, and the vice president becomes the acting president. If the president contests this, then it goes to Congress, like you said, Jen, and then you have the 2/3 in both houses have to determine whether or not the president has a disability that prevents him from holding the office. But that's not big numbers, folks. That is the vice president and 8 people. And for people who want power, who thirst for power, who want to see the Democratic agenda happen, I think that this is just a breath away and very possible.
Well, like I said, we still have about 3 years to go. There's a lot more that, unfortunately, President Biden could destroy, and who knows where he'll be a year from now or more, depending on how he's doing cognitively. Amir Benno, as always, so great to have you with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our allies horrified and our enemies mocking. Aside from the horror of what we're seeing there, this has become one of the most embarrassing incidents in our country. We're not only losing face with our enemies, even our loyal friends are backing away, Steve.
Yes, unfortunately. And they say, by the way, keep your friends close, but your enemies closer. When I say they say that, I think I mostly attribute that to the Corleones. And in this country, unfortunately, we've got a fox in the henhouse. In fact, we've got several of them.
We do.
Former head of the NSA and CIA, Mike Michael Hayden. He has become, you've probably noticed him, because he's become an omnipresent defender of the administrative state and a hater of all things Trump and America First related. It's amazing just how much, by the way, the political parties have changed in their beliefs about the intelligence community. Now that those powerful government agencies have gone fully woke, the left embraces irresponsible, authoritarian morons like Michael Hayden. Now, there are still some honest liberals out there, apparently. Apparently, they do still exist. Here is Columbia Journalism Review's analysis of Hayden. Yes, that Columbia, the Ivy League University, not exactly a font of nationalist right-wing thought. Here's what they said, quote, members of the media who play along with this fantasyland portrayal of Hayden should be embarrassed. Hayden has a long history of making misleading and outright false statements, and by the estimation of many lawyers, likely committed countless felonies during the Bush administration. It is something of a wonder that someone responsible for so many reprehensible acts is now considered a totally above the fray, honest commentator. Kudos to the Columbia Journalism Review. The article also details how Hayden, as NSA chief, oversaw the illegal, warrantless wiretapping of scores of American citizens. On top of his disrespect for the Bill of Rights and due process, Hayden is also just completely incompetent. He oversaw the NSA up to and during 9/11 in what is probably the worst intelligence failure in U.S. history, the fact that we had no warning. Now, in a rational world, Hayden would have been fired. Instead, he was given an even higher profile job as head of the CIA. After missing the clues about the plans of our adversaries and spying illegally on Americans, he then decided to do what intel chiefs all seem to do when they leave public service. He became a TV star, of course, mainly by ridiculing Donald Trump 24/7 and belittling the regular citizens who happen to believe in the populist nationalist agenda, our movement. In recent days, Hayden responded to one of my social media posts in which I stated that bringing thousands of Afghani migrants to America right now is a terrible idea. Predictably, he joined the likes of CNN's Jake Tapper and many others in the blue-check Twitterdom who claim that only racists believe in U.S. sovereignty. But then Hayden, he went even further. In response to some knucklehead in the tweet's thread, he called it a, quote, good idea to send MAGA-wearing unvaxxed to Afghanistan. Now, was he kidding, trolling, dead serious? It's hard to know. But here's the reality. This is one of the most powerful spy chiefs in all of U.S. history, basically saying that those who subscribe to the beliefs of the MAGA agenda should be killed, because that's what would likely await any American civilian shipped off to Afghanistan. That would be the consequence. Now, speaking of the Taliban, General Hayden also tweeted out this shameful comparison. Apparently, he actually thinks that a patriotic caravan of Trump supporters peacefully, jubilantly waving American flags equates to the most murderous thugs on the planet, the Islamist cretins of the Taliban, who abjectly hate America. They hate a lot of things, but they really hate America. His posts, they reveal a sick heart of a man who should have never been trusted with the vast powers that he once wielded and that he once possessed. Unfortunately, he's hardly unique. He's not just a terrible outlier. We've learned in recent years that our national security establishment is full of this kind of so-called leader, from Jim Comey to John Brennan to Mark Milley. Far too often, our national security agencies operate as a sort of parallel government, one that is not accountable to you, the citizens, nor to the civilians that we elect, that we, the people, elect. Joining us to discuss this now is James Carafano. He's the Director of Foreign Policy Studies and Vice President for the Institute for International Studies at the Heritage Foundation. Jim, thank you so much for being with us tonight. Now, listen, when I look at the intelligence community agencies of the government, when I look at a lot of law enforcement agencies of the federal government, and then when I look at the other national security operations, including the Pentagon, I really see a leadership class. I'm not talking about rank and file people, certainly not talking about the fighting men and women who did so much brave work in Afghanistan. But when I look at the leadership class of those agencies, I really believe, and I want to get your view on this though as an expert, I really believe that we have created, or we have allowed them to create, effectively a parallel government that is not subject to the will of the American people. Your thoughts, Jim?
Well, first of all, you said something I thought was really important, which is the rank and file of intelligence and law enforcement community, U.S. military, who largely are mission-oriented, committed to their jobs, and come to work and do their best to make Americans safer every day. And when you talk about leadership, I do think there's kind of this two-track thing, and I am seeing big differences, particularly when you look at this group of intelligence leaders who then became political, and look at their track record. They were wrong about collusion. They were wrong about quid pro quo. They were wrong about the insurrection. They were wrong about Hunter Biden's laptop, and they purport themselves as they're playing off their intelligence careers as if they're kind of better analysts than other people. This is a crop of people that I think is really quite dangerous, and there are lots of really solid senior former intelligence officials who are incredible and who actually continue to work and serve this country every day. But you know what? They're not on MSNBC. They're not on CNN. They're not out there selling their former careers for their own personal gain. And I see this in the military as well. I think, and I'm a 25-year military veteran, I think this is the worst crop of senior military leaders we've ever had. I think they're careerists. I think they're more interested in their own careers than in protecting the American people in many cases. And again, we see them leaving office and going into cushy jobs on the left, cushy pundit jobs. And so there's a part of this senior leadership which literally has gone to the dark side. I don't know how else to put it.
Jim, if you look at the current leadership in these national security intelligence agencies, how deep and murky is this swamp? How many of his cronies are still working there? How much of this mentality still exists today?
Well, this is where political leadership is so important. And it isn't even necessarily Republican, Democrat. So if you look at Gina Haspel, for example, who was the CIA director for much of Trump's term, she was actually and a career person. I don't think she was the strongest leader. She didn't reform the agency. She didn't root out a lot of these political practices that we see. Mike Pompeo, who was at CIA far shorter, is a political guy, had less intelligence experience, was a far better leader. So getting the right people at the top of these agencies is so important. And you need to put people there who are there for the right reason. They're there to look after the interests of the American people. They're there not as the next step in my political career where I make money off of the job I just had.
Sure. And speaking of making money off of the job they had and prestige and sort of cashing in, and I would say exploiting, really, their government service, I want to point out here in the case of Michael Hayden, because he's the one I'm mostly talking about, although, he's not unique, unfortunately. But Michael Hayden, there is actually a Hayden Center at George Mason University, which is the largest public university in the state of Virginia, in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Excuse me, Virginians get mad if you call it a state. The Michael Hayden Center for Intelligence, Policy, and International Study. Now, Jim, first of all, I think it's just creepy and weird to name things after living people. I think it's generally a pretty terrible idea. But beyond that, the fact that George Mason is rewarding this former NSA and CIA chief in this way by naming an entire institute after him, doesn't that just give shouldn't there be, for regular citizens of the United States, a certain cringe factor here that this is the administrative state, this is the political class of Washington, D.C., completely shutting out regular Americans for their selfish benefit?
Yeah, so you know what? There's a really interesting thing here. And I wasn't kidding when I said seduced by the dark side. Look, the left doesn't really care about national security. They don't care about foreign policy. They don't care about defense. But they like to have these guys around because it gives them street cred. So why do they make Austin the head of the Pentagon? So they can say, look, we have a general, so we care about this stuff. But really what they do is there is a whole bunch of, we will reward you. You get money. You get to go to the right parties. We will like you. And even people who in their career were actually non-political, when they get outside and they're seduced by the left, they go, well, I have to play along. So, and quite honestly, look, the right doesn't do that. Conservatives don't go around and say, hey, do our stuff and we'll make sure you get a big cushy job. I mean, look at General Flynn. Nobody took care of him. I mean, look at nobody takes care of these people. But the left, they seduce them with jobs, with respect, with conferences, with getting centers named after them, with getting big contracts. And that's how they buy their national security expertise. And look, just to show you how this plays out, Look at the Obama team. It is all full of these experienced, credentialed, leftist national security professionals who had 8 years. They're backed up by all these experts and advisors who they have in boards and everything else. So they've got probably more foreign policy, national security experience than any incoming administration. And they've been an absolute disaster, because they can get on CNN, they can get on NBC, they can have a center named after them, they can get a book contract, but they can't figure out how to actually deal with America's enemies, because it's not really about national security or foreign policy. It's about
we got to take a step. I was just going to say, we've got to take a step back here and be honest. If this was somebody on the right who had tweeted out something similar to what Hayden had said about left comparing them to the Taliban, they'd be booted off Twitter, and Attorney General Merrick Garland would be coming after them for being, quote, domestic terrorists. Am I wrong?
Look, I worked for, I was in the Pentagon. I worked for senior officers who were on the Joint Chiefs of Staff, combatant commanders. I've been around political leaders for 20 years. The old rules have kind of evaporated. The old rules of the stature of honoring your service, whether it's in the military, intelligence, and representing that well after you retire, of being faithful, nonpartisan, straightforward, that's gone. I mean, no respectable veteran would tweet that kind of social media stuff. It's just unthinkable.
James Carafano, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
Former President Trump has called for Joe Biden to resign in disgrace over his Afghanistan troop withdrawal. But some in the GOP aren't interested in letting Sleepy Joe decide, calling to invoke the 25th Amendment. Could it really be used? As the American withdrawal from Afghanistan continues to be a quagmire, President Biden addressed the press today about vaccinations.
Please get vaccinated today. God bless you all, and may God protect our troops. Thank you.
So much for transparency and respect for a free press. I'd like to welcome in Texas Representative and retired Rear Admiral Ronnie Jackson, who also served as physician to former President Trump. Representative Jackson, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Hey, thank you guys for having me.
You know, there are a lot of Americans concerned right now when we talk about the vaccine, getting FDA approval, the Pfizer vaccine. They're thinking, my rights are going away if I don't get this vaccine. What does this mean for them, and what is your advice to them tonight?
Well, I think that's true. I think this is just an effort for them to remove freedoms that we're all used to. And the Democrats and the Biden administration have been big on that all along. And look, I'm not an anti-vaxxer, and I've had the vaccine myself. I encourage my parents. As they're older, I wanted my sister to get it because she was immunocompromised. But I will maintain till the day I die that this vaccine should be a personal choice. And the government does not have the right to force or impose getting shots on us, and they're going to do it. They're going to talk businesses into it. They're going to talk state and local governments into it. They're going to eventually get to the point where we can't go to the movie theater. We can't go buy groceries. We can't do anything unless we have the vaccine. And this is not America. This is not right.
They're saying now the military will be required to get it. It was either mid-September or FDA approval, whichever comes first. So what do you say about that?
Well, look, the military's always been a little bit different, and I've been in the military for 29 years, and I was required to get certain vaccines. But here's the deal. This vaccine, even though I don't call it experimental, it's FDA approved now. Bravo. Maybe some people that'll be the decision maker for them. They'll go out and get it, people that are eligible for it, people that will benefit from it. But the reality is this vaccine is still, it's new technology. It's mRNA. We don't have any vaccines that are developed like this. So I still think that they should respect a person's individual choice to decide whether or not they want to get this vaccine. I think it's safe. I don't see any studies that show that it's not, but I don't see any studies that show that it is long term, because we just don't know. This vaccine hasn't been out there long enough. We don't know what the long-term consequences of this vaccine are.
To that point, let me ask you about this, because I think this is crucial, and this is where we want to lean on you, not just as a congressman, but as a physician. When you look at the history of vaccine approval, it can take 10 or 15 years. I mean, literally years and years, not weeks and months, as it did this time. So I think to those of us who are not physicians, this smells bad, and it smells really, really political. What do you think as a physician about having an FDA approval this fast of a totally new type of vaccine or new type of therapy?
Well, look, I think what we know right now is we know that the vaccine is safe in the short term. OK, we've had millions and millions of people that have got it. And we know that the short term consequences of the vaccine are most likely safe. We don't know, like you said, what the long term consequences are. We don't know what we would otherwise know in a normal vaccine trial 10 years out. So these are the questions that we have to get answered. And this is why I think that it's still a personal choice. And they need to respect the people that are worried about that. They don't have the right to tell you what you can and cannot be concerned about when it comes to your own personal health.
Congressman, I want to shift gears just a little bit. We mentioned Afghanistan in the start earlier. And one thing President Biden was asked in a briefing yesterday about his cognitive ability, essentially. A lot of people have been questioning this, especially on the right, saying, is he fit for the job? You have been calling on him to resign for a while now as a result of his cognitive abilities and kind of lack thereof. I want you to listen to what he had to say yesterday in responding to this question from CBS. We don't have it? Okay, sorry. Well, if you saw the briefing yesterday, he was asked about this poll by CBS saying that most Americans believe he is not there. He's not fit to serve. Your reaction to that?
Well, he laughed it off. He actually said, I haven't seen that poll. Like, he just laughed it off. And when they said ABC, he laughed again. And the reality is that I have been saying this. I've been talking about this for over a year and a half. Back when he was candidate Biden, I was talking about this. And I said, something's not right. This man's not fit to be our president. He's not fit to be our commander in chief. And we have seen in full display how he is absolutely positively not fit to be our commander in chief right now. He has put this country in a horrible position. He has caused a huge national security issue for us. And he is going to get lots and lots of Americans and lots of our allies killed. And this will be something that we have to live with for decades. And go back to your FDA thing real quickly. This is not a coincidence that this FDA thing came out right now. I think this is the Biden administration's effort to get this out so that it changes the narrative right now. They are sinking on Afghanistan. And the thing is the reason that it's starting to rise with this issue, like him not being cognitively fit to be president anymore, is because his own party's starting to talk about it now. And the reason it's pretty obvious right now that what's happening is that they don't trust him, even within the White House, even within the West Wing. I don't think they trust him to make these decisions. Right. And I don't think they're giving him all the information, quite frankly. I think they actually keep him in the dark a lot. I think when he comes out, it looks like he doesn't know what's going on. He hasn't been told.
It's very telling when you see these trips to Wilmington, this hesitancy to take any questions from the press. Everything's very calculated, I've noticed.
So, Congressman, to that point of the suspicious timing, one thing I've heard from a lot of the vaccine skeptics is that the reason that this FDA approval needed to happen so quickly is because now we're moving on to the next phase, which is boosters, right? And there's a lot of pushback, even from people who are anxious to get the first two shots or the first shot, depending on which one they got. There's a lot of pushback to the boosters. One person from the political left is Bill Maher. Let's listen to his comments over the weekend on the boosters.
I don't want a booster. Look, I never wanted the vaccine. I took one for the team. And by the way, you know who doesn't get a lot of vaccines? The millennials. I know a lot of millennials, especially the 20-year-olds. They don't want it. They don't want it. They don't think they need it. They're probably right. But I tell them, I didn't want it either. I took one for the team.
So, Dr. Ronnie Jackson, you did get the shot, but did you sign up for the Fauci Shot of the Month Club? Do you really believe that you should start getting boosters on a regular basis?
I didn't, and I couldn't agree with him more. I got it because I realized I couldn't do my job. I wasn't going to be able to travel in Congress unless I got it or not. Now, like I said, I was okay getting it because I thought it was probably safe, but I didn't really feel like I absolutely positively had to have it because of my age and because I don't have any comorbidities. And he's right. Young people, millennials, certainly kids, and that's the next step. They're going to be trying to get our kids to get it. They don't need it. They don't get sick from it. Even if they get it, they don't get symptoms and they don't get sick from it. We shouldn't be exposing them to a vaccine that we don't know the long-term effects of, especially at their young age when they don't actually have to have it. So, they're right. I mean, this is just crazy. I mean, and I will tell you, I mean, what better way to change the narrative if you're in the middle of the biggest national disaster history in my lifetime and you're about to get thousands of Americans killed on the battlefield by our enemy and the Taliban and hand over an entire country to our terrorist enemies. What better way to do that than to start the narrative on booster shots, knowing that it'll get some people spun up and that some people will get irritated with it and start talking about that instead of the disaster that you've created overseas.
Well, Congressman Ronnie Jackson, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Great to have you on the program.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
Pentagon officials held two briefings today in an attempt to salvage their reputation as the disastrous Afghanistan withdrawal moves forward. Part of that included an update on evacuations.
Since the end of July, we have relocated approximately 42,000 people. Since the beginning of evacuation operations on August 14th, we have evacuated approximately 37,000.
But of course, the Pentagon didn't have answers for what we all really want to know. How many U.S. citizens have evacuated?
Do you have any breakdown of the number of U.S. citizens in that 42,000 that have gotten out?
I do, but I don't have that right now.
Well, at least you came prepared as we work to get Americans out of Afghanistan by next Tuesday's deadline. Our next guest is wondering what we could have accomplished if we kept all of those resources stateside for the past 20 years. He wrote all about it for American Greatness in a piece called Paying Yesterday's Bills in Afghanistan. He joins us now, the editor and publisher of American Greatness, Chris Buskirk. Chris, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks a lot for having me.
So, my question to you is, you talk a lot in your article about some of the red flags, I think, that we should have seen over the past 20 years in terms of we should have gotten out a lot sooner. Why do you think we missed those?
Gosh, that's a great question, and that really is the big question I was trying to answer in the piece that I wrote. But what I think is that this points to the sort of generational failure of America's ruling class, and this has been a bipartisan failure. I mean, let's remember that the American mission in Afghanistan started in September of 2001. That's 20 years ago. And what we were trying to do when we went into Afghanistan back then is we're trying to find Osama bin Laden, which was, of course, the right thing to be doing at that time. We found out shortly thereafter, towards the end of 2001, that we had our eyes on him when he was in Tora Bora. We missed him. He got away. And then somehow the mission morphed, and it became something else altogether. It was about getting rid of the Taliban, and then it was after that it turned into something else about trying to create some sort of Jeffersonian democracy in the middle of the mountains of Central Asia. It just didn't make any sense. And what we found out over time is that the people who were in charge of making that policy have been lying to us all along. They've been telling everybody who was in a position of authority, no, it's going great, and if you just give us one more year, we're just about to turn the corner. So send more money and send more men. And it turns out it has just been a daisy chain of lies written in American blood.
Right. And, Chris, it's not just an opinion of yours or mine that they were lying to us. We know that factually because of the Afghanistan Papers, which was just a terrific work. It was a journalistic triumph, frankly, by the Washington Post, a paper that I don't often praise, but that was so important for this country. I want to ask you if you could comment, too, Chris, about the folly of, when you said the mission changed. Initially, it was to crush the Taliban and to kill bin Laden. Great and worthy goals, right, for this country. But then the mission changed many times, and it really became more than anything about supposedly promoting democracy there. And I'd like you to comment, if you would, about the folly of us right now promoting democracy in faraway lands on the other side of the earth, when right now we have political violence in the United States. For example, over the weekend in Portland, terrible political violence on the streets of a major American city. In Washington, D.C. right now, in the D.C. deplorables jail, we have political prisoners in the United States. So wouldn't it behoove us to worry about our own democracy and the health of this republic before we worry about trying to promote those Jeffersonian ideals other third world places on the globe?
Well, Steve, this is one of my main contentions, is that really when we get into these sort of foreign military adventures, the ones that consume so much time and so much money and so much of our attention, both sort of media attention, political attention, the attention of our policymakers, these are really just a big coping mechanism for what we're not doing but should be doing here at home. It's a way of distracting people's attention. You talk about the political prisoners who are being held in D.C. jails right now. That's a big issue. How about the fact that the Taliban has a Twitter account and former President Trump doesn't? I mean, what kind of a place, what are exactly the rules that we're operating under here, where the Taliban has access to social media, where the former President of the United States does not? We need to focus our attention, our resources, our best and brightest on how we can build up American small r Republican government. How do we make this a robust, prosperous, peaceful country? There have been more incidents of political violence in the past year in this country than there have been in this country at any time since the late 60s and early 70s. We know what that time period was like. That does not point in the right direction. And so my contention has been, and continues to be, we need to do for ourselves what we are purporting to do abroad and aren't doing very well there either.
And Chris, one item you pointed out is something that Steve and I have been paying attention to, that a lot of Americans are very concerned about, is all these refugees we see coming over. And it seems like they are prioritized over actual American citizens coming back to the country from Afghanistan. And in your article, you say, quote, "We should be clear-eyed about the reality of any Afghan immigration program." You talk about abuses of the system. What are those realities facing us as all these refugees come over from Afghanistan?
Well, I'll give you one that just came out. That it just came out this afternoon. Already, we know that one of the so-called our loyal allies who were evacuated was on the no-fly list. I mean, this is the type of vetting that they're doing, and we find out only after the fact that they're just rushing to get these people onto these C-17s. You saw the general there in the Pentagon. He had no idea how many of these people were Americans, which should be his number one job. They're not even vetting the people that they're throwing onto these C-17s who are not American citizens. And then we find out later, well, this one person in particular was on a no-fly list. You know, we have seen so many what they call sort of green on red violence. You know, the allies, the Afghan allies, committing violence against American soldiers in Afghanistan. That has been an ongoing problem for the past 20 years. We've seen so much of that. Why? Because the Taliban was amongst our troops, posing as our allies. Now, these are the same people that, in part, are going to be evacuated into the United States and into Western Europe. How smart is that?
Chris Buskirk, thank you so much for being with us tonight. We really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot.